so ever get the feeling there's got to be more to life than just, well, this. Like maybe, just maybe, there's some bigger truth out there, but you don't want to check your brain at the door to find it.
You're speaking to our inner skeptic.
Right. Like
Mm.
you're open to exploring spirituality, but crystals and incense aren't really your thing.
Yeah, and all that dogma just makes you want to run for the hills.
Exactly. Well, that's where this deep dive gets interesting. We're dissecting this software engineer's, I guess you'd call it a spiritual awakening. But here's the thing, he breaks it down like he's debugging code.
Which, I mean, makes sense, right? Software engineer is how he thinks. But that's what makes this so relatable. He starts from this place of, he calls it default atheism.
The Church of Duh, right? I laughed out loud when you said that.
Me too. It's so spot on, though. It's like this assumption that anything outside the realm of logic is just, well, BS.
And he fully admits he was all about that life for a good chunk of time.
Totally. But then he hits this turning point. He was 42, by the way, and starts to realize he's been approaching this whole spirituality thing way too narrowly.
Like he'd put himself in a box.
Exactly. And I think that's a really common experience. We form these beliefs, and then we kind of just filter out anything that doesn't fit.
Confirmation bias?
Yes. Cognitive Science 101. We see what we want to see and ignore the rest.
So how'd this guy break out of that? Like, how do you go from Church of Duh to, well, wherever he ended up?
He calls it blaspheming the right. Basically, he forced himself to question everything, even his atheism. And that willingness to challenge his own worldview, even the stuff that felt really comfortable, that's what opened him up.
So even being wrong can be like a step in the right direction.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes you got to break it all down to build something new.
Okay, so he's challenging his own beliefs, which is like step one. But then what? Where does this guy go from there? How does he even start to bridge that gap between spirituality, which can feel kind of out there, and this logic-driven mindset that he's coming from?
Well, that's where his background as a software engineer actually becomes like a superpower. Instead of approaching spirituality as this mystical, esoteric thing, he starts to see it as a system for state optimization.
State optimization.
Yeah, basically like how do you optimize the state of your own mind? Like how do you debug your own thinking?
Oh, I love that. Like
Yeah.
instead of debugging code, he's debugging his brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where all this cognitive science stuff comes in. He starts to look at things like mindfulness and meditation as tools.
Tools for what?
Tools to help him identify and then hopefully correct the mental patterns that were causing him suffering or dissatisfaction or just, keeping him stuck.
So it's about taking control. It's not just like, oh, I feel this way and I'm just going to wallow in it.
Right. It's like, okay, I feel this way. Why? What's going on here?
And then what?
And then, he actually uses this really cool analogy. He talks about emotions as like these knobs that we can learn to adjust with practice.
Okay, hold on. Knobs. Tell me more about that. I like where this is going.
So, for example, he talks about how in the past, someone cut him off in traffic. He'd just get hit with this wave of anger.
Ugh, yeah. Road rage, the struggle is real.
Totally. But he's saying through mindfulness, he could actually observe that anger without letting it completely take over.
That's a game changer, right? To be able to just notice it without letting it consume you.
Exactly. He'd acknowledge it was there. He'd try to understand what triggered it, and then he could choose how much he wanted to engage with it.
So he's not suppressing it. He's not pretending it's not there. He's just choosing his response.
Exactly. It's like you're not your emotions, right? You're the observer of your emotions.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful shift.
So he's figured out how to debug his mind, but then that kind of opens up this whole other can of worms, right? He's asking, what happens when you do level up your consciousness? Then what?
Yeah, it's like if you buy into this idea that spirituality is about more than just feeling good, then the search for meaning, that becomes the ultimate quest.
And he doesn't shy away from that at all. There's this part where he's like, could you find a framework for not just tolerating, but actively loving an infinite lifespan?
Yo.
Right. Just sit with that for a second, could you? It makes you think, man.
It really does. It's like he's pushing us to confront the biggest questions about life, about death, about what it even means to exist. And what I find so interesting is that he seems to see this desire for meaning, this need to make sense of it all, even in the face of eternity, as a fundamental part of what it means to be human. It's like we're hardwired for it or something.
Totally. And this is where he makes this really fascinating connection back to figures like Buddha, Jesus, these spiritual heavy hitters.
Okay, I'm listening.
He's basically suggesting that these guys weren't just preaching about finding meaning. They'd actually solve the problem.
That's a bold statement. So how'd they do it? What's the secret sauce?
Well, he talks a lot about this idea of individuation. And this is where it gets, I think, really applicable for anyone who's like actually trying to cultivate a more fulfilling life.
Okay, break it down for me. What's individuation?
So it's this process of like becoming so grounded in who you really are in your own internal compass that you no longer need external validation. So you're not looking to other people or to achievements or to like things to tell you who you are or to give your life meaning. You're finding it from within.
Exactly. And he's like brutally honest about how messy and challenging that journey can be, especially when, your ideas or your experiences don't fit into these neat little boxes that society tries to put us in.
Yeah, he even makes this joke like maybe AI will be the only audience with a long enough attention span for this kind of deep internal work.
Right.
But on a serious note, I think he makes a really compelling case for why this matters. And not just for software engineers or, spiritual seekers. Like this idea of really cultivating a strong sense of self, of finding that meaning from within, that's something that anyone who wants to live a more authentic and fulfilling life, that's something we can all benefit from.
Totally. It's like universal wisdom, but like presented in this really fresh and engaging way.
Absolutely. And that brings us to something he mentions that stuck with me. Remember how he kept talking about energy? Especially that kind of like lingering, almost heavy energy you can feel after a conflict.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting. He definitely seemed to be using that word as more than just a metaphor, like suggesting it has this real impact,
Right.
on our mental and emotional states.
Right. And it made me think, like, is there more to that than we realize? I mean, could there actually be a scientific explanation for this energy that we're just like starting to grasp? Something beyond, I don't know, maybe even our current understanding of like psychology or physics or something. It's a total trip to think about.
It is. It's like
Yeah.
he's reminding us that as much as we like to think we have things figured out, there's still so much we don't know. And that's kind of exciting.
Totally. It's like he's saying, keep asking the big questions, keep digging deeper. You never know what you might find. And on that note, we're going to have to leave it there for today. But hey, keep exploring, keep those conversations going, and we'll catch you in the next deep dive.